Hello, welcome again to Palava, the podcast series and discussion forum where we ask ourselves deep yet deceptively simple questions. As you know, sometimes the simplest questions often cut the deepest. In this podcast series, we want to apply our minds to the defining questions of the age, questions that go to the bottom of why we as an African community are perennially at the bottom of all the league tables in the world that matter. More importantly, we will identify what we can do now to change this situation, particularly when we are faced with an uncertain world where everything seems to be stacked against us. I'm Tito Alai, and as you will hear, I have faced these questions several times during my extensive career as an expatriate from Africa. You can download every episode of the Palava podcast from our website at palava.org or stream it from whichever platform that you use. In the previous episode, we left off at the point where I was dumbfounded by a deceptively simple question. I was on a visit to China, and my host was the CEO of ZTE Corporation, China's leading telecom equipment and technology company at that time. After 11 days in each other's company, we had established a strong bond and were quite at ease in each other's company. I had arrived through Hong Kong with a strong contingent or entourage, whatever you want to call it, of 22 young African executives from our subsidiaries. Countries that spanned all the way from the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. If you recall, we had held a formal set-piece meeting in the vast boardroom of ZTE at their Shenzhen campus. And during the meeting, curiously enough, we all were overcome by this spell where we totally forgot any English that we had learned or we had picked up during our educational and professional careers. And so our host spoke entirely in Chinese, Mandarin, I believe, but it could have been Cantonese for all I know. And I was prepared and reciprocated by speaking entirely in Kiswahili. The only people who could speak English was his interpreter and my interpreter, a lady from Tanzania. So, at the end of the meeting, my host, having recovered his powers of English, he was overcome. He came to me with tears in his eyes and he says, "Tito, I want to thank you and thank you and thank you again from the bottom of my heart because we receive so many visitors from Africa and from all over the world, so to speak, and you are the first to speak to me in your own language. So I want to thank you for honoring me by speaking to me in my own language." And of course, that's when the significance of speaking in Kiswahili dawned on my colleagues who had been stifling, giggles of laughter, wondering what all this pantomime was all about. Okay, so because of this, I would like to imagine he cleared his calendar or diary for the whole week, and he gave me the freedom of China in the sense that he took me around to 4 or 5 major cities, including places like Chengdu, Xi'an, the one that starts with an X, Beijing, Shanghai. And during that, I also had the opportunity to visit all these tremendous kind of places, these timeless wonders, including the Great Wall of China, the Heavenly Temple, the Forbidden City. These are amazing places with phenomenal names, as you can see. Now, this guy had no doubt seen all these things. I come from Kenya, so the number of times we've been to the national parks taking visitors is quite a lot, even though we enjoy it. He must have seen all this stuff countless times. So he took the opportunity to catch up with business meetings during the day while they arranged for me to go to these glorious hotspots with the tour guides. But every evening we had dinner together and we discussed all sorts of topics and caught up on our backgrounds and everything. And this is where we developed a very, very strong friendship. Now, we were in Shanghai on the last night of my visit. We were having the Last Supper, so to speak. And we were in a fine restaurant overlooking the multicolored, wonderful night sky of Shanghai. And my host, having benefited from a good dinner, washed down with a beverage called Baiju, which is a strong spirit, a traditional spirit of actually frightening strength. But he then reached out to me. He leant forward and he says, Tito, there's a question that has been nagging me for a long time. And you're the first African I've been this close to. So please forgive me, but I hope you don't mind if I ask you the question. And I say, of course, ask away, my brother. We are now brothers. We know each other. Feel free to ask me whatever it is that you have on your mind. And he asks me, tell me, Tito, what are you Africans about? Now, I don't know about you, but to this day, if you ask me, even personally, what am I about? It still remains a deep question. I have to reflect on it. I have to ponder it. I have to meditate on it. You have to study it. You have to consider it. Whatever big word you want to put to trying to engage in some deep thinking. This remains a question that you can preoccupy ourselves with for a really long time. That's individually, but even as a group, as a people, how do we engage in a process where we validate what we're about? And so I was dumbfounded. And as one would do, I bought myself some time. And that means I told him, wow, that is a fantastic question. That's a really good question. And then to buy myself a bit more time, as my brain was cranking at 1,000 revs per minute, I asked him, just so I know what you're asking me, if I asked you the same question of you over 1 billion Chinese people, what would you say? And he just relaxed and says, Tito, that's a very, that's straightforward. We are a civilization of more than 4,000 years old. You had our philosophers, we've got our beliefs, we've got our mythology, and all these writings that we have. But it all boils down to one sentence, but let me boil it down to one word. And that one word for the Chinese is balance, equilibrium, in other words. Where he says, we are on a quest, we are always seeking balance in our personal lives, in our family lives, in our professional lives. And even internationally, what we really deeply, from a cultural worldview point of view, is we seek balance. And so the pressure came back on. I says, okay, so what about you Africans? What are you about? And having had the benefit of reflection, let me share with you what I shared with him. I said, now, you started by saying that the Chinese civilization is 4,000, 5,000 years, old. But I'm here to tell you that ours is even older because it stretches back to prehistory in the sense that Africa is the cradle of mankind. But, you know, having set this up, he says, okay, so go on. And I say, the problem we have is that our traditions were quite brutally interrupted by the colonialists and the slave traders who came. And over 500 years just wreaked havoc on what we could have inherited from our ancestors as our heritage and traditions. But despite all this, most of it quite deliberate because, I've read a lot of these things, writings and outpourings. Almost all of it from European authors, adventurers, historians, whatever. And you never get the sense that these guys respected our traditions, had it in their intent that, oh yeah, we'll, let these guys just carry on as they are. On the contrary, they came with the express intent of imposing their language and their cultures upon indigenous populations wherever they went to invade. Nevertheless, thanks to the resilience and perseverance, I'd say, of our ancestors and their resourcefulness, the fate of African people is not as bad as what happened to other indigenous communities who were totally wiped out. And I'm speaking about the so-called New World. So that's America, New Zealand, Australia. And the same methodology that was employed there was attempted in Africa. But thanks to our ancestors, we are still here. Even those who faced the most brutal, trafficking across oceans and worked for free, gave their labor in these places that had slavery as part of their economic system. We still survived and are thriving even in those places. African people continue to contribute largely to these countries. Okay, having survived, we did not only survive. We also retained a golden thread that binds us together as a people. And I want to try to boil that down into a single word, just like my Chinese host, who actually I'm addressing. I'm just taking you back to this discussion that we had over dinner in Shanghai. So I'm trying to boil this down for 1.4 billion Africans. Boil it down to one word. And to my mind, having traveled in most of the 54 countries on the continent and also beyond, is that it boils down to this word that I'm going to propose, which is multiplicity. Multiplicity. Now, I could have used the word diversity, but this word, just like as we go along in our discussions, we will discover that the English language is laden with so many booby traps. We have to be careful when we are using it, because diversity has been used, especially in Europe, America, these Western places. It has been used as a word which signals this good intent to be inclusive of people that they call minorities. So I did not want to go there because that's not what we're about in Africa. It's something else. And this something else is that we are the community that has conserved the richest cultural resources in the world in the form of speaking over 2,000 languages, that are still alive. How have we done so? It must be because intrinsically we do not have this culture where the strong exterminates the weak. In other words, what to bring it home, I've traveled all over. I've lived in the Netherlands. If I take the Dutch as an example, the Dutch are the Dutch. I mean, they look Dutch, they speak Dutch, their history is Dutch, their traditions is Dutch, and that's who they are. It's homogenous to a large extent, and the same in many European nations. Dare I say, it's the same for Asian nations as well, by and large. And in Africa, we stand for something different. It is not a process historically where dominant cultures come over and coerce let me not even say dominant, because they start by being domineering, let's put it that way. And over time, they assimilate, but most likely through more forceful means. You find having a territory that's just occupied by people who want to be homogenous. They want to speak one language. And if you happen to be there as a visitor, they can make your life pretty uncomfortable to this day. Now, African society intrinsically, even though we've picked up a lot of bad habits through education, is about multiplicity. We are multilingual, we are multicultural. If I had a word for multibiological in terms of when we come to the environmental question, where we really prize biodiversity. An African forest is not like a traditional European forest, which tends to have one species. An African forest features thousands of species, and we are comfortable with that, much as we are being convinced that that's not the way to develop. We will come to these. This is the purpose of this series that I'm setting up called Afrika Palava, a broad discussion. Okay, so multiplicity is what I'd say we are about. Now, I would like to ask you, as a listener, what do you think of this answer that I gave? Join this podcast series, comment freely, invite your friends to the discussion, and look out for live events where we will engage further in these matters, because we will break down starting from the next episode, what multiplicity as a hook involves. You see, for the Chinese, as I learned, balance or yin and yang and other expressions of it in Confucianism and all this stuff that we've heard. It's a strong enough conceptual hook or philosophical thing that upon which they can hang all their cultural identity and what they're about. We are about multiplicity, and in defining what multiplicity means, it goes beyond diversity from our traditional common usage. It goes beyond that. And what we have to remind ourselves is we have to go back to our ancestral traditions and find out why we are so tolerant of difference that in one country, a small country of 10 million people, you will easily have people speaking over 20 different languages. That's not the norm across the world. So it must mean that we know how to live with multiplicity, and we will break it down in each. What does it translate to economically? What does it translate to socially? what does it translate to from an environmental protection point of view? And what does this concept translate to in a world where the perception is that we've become war-ridden and, kind of people who are always mired in violence and strife that always flares up in many African countries, and we will come to that, discussing peace and how we bring about peace and pull together as an African continent. So thank you, and look out for the next episode where we will start to break down what we mean by multiplicity. Possibly we will go subject by subject, but look out for the next episode. Thank you very much. Bye.